Welcome back, everyone. We are doing our final part in the First Crusade by Kings and Generals. This has been a wild ride. We've done 5.5 hours of this video, and there's just a little bit left. Glad you're here. Make sure you hit that like button. It really does help the channel. Let's just jump right in, shall we?
Course of this story, we examined the unraveling of the Byzantine Empire after the death of Basil II, culminating in the Battle of Manzikert and the Norman invasions. In the chaos that followed, what seemed to be just another usurper climbed the steps and sat on the throne in Constantinople. Alexios Komnenos had no treasury, no army, little legitimacy, and few allies.
Yeah, we gotta recognize Alexios really saved this empire.
So he conjured up a story and meticulously aimed.
I mean, look how much left is of the Eastern Roman Empire. It's just Greece. It's just Greece and a little bit of modern day Turkey. That's it.
It at the Latin world, sprinkling religious artifacts as trinkets that spurred the imagination of peasants, nobles, and clergy alike. The emperor was successful and carefully guided the largest army assembled in Europe in the past 700 years, directing it towards the heartland of treacherous Anatolia, despite many provocations and raids. Now in the year 1111, less than 10% of that splintered army remained. But their stubborn existence in the face of Seljuk, Fatimid, and Byzantine attacks would change the course
and Byzantine attacks is crazy
of history forever. Alexios was becoming wiser with age, but that also came with illnesses such as gout and asthma, letting him know that the clock was ticking. That same clock had already run out for both Bohemond, who died isolated in Apulia, and Bertrand of Tripoli, who was succeeded by his 14-year-old son, Pont. Tancred, who was acting regent of Antioch, pounced at the opportunity and reconciled with the Occitan contingent in the Holy Lands by granting to Tosa, Maraclea, Safita, and Crac de Chevalier, all claimed by the counts of Tripoli, to Pont as fiefs. The young lord, technically a vassal of both Byzantium and Jerusalem, was now indebted to the Normans. That following year, the man instrumental in both capturing and holding Antioch, Tancred, succumbed to typhus.
So now Tancred's dead.
In his will, he ordered his wife, Cecile, daughter of the French king, to be engaged to Pont, further cementing the alliance between the two factions. The princedom of Galie passed to Joscelin of Courtenay, while Antioch was inherited by Bohemond's 4-year-old son, Bohemond II.
Yeah, he's not gonna rule.
Who was back in Italy with his mother, Constance. Naturally, this meant that a new regent was needed, and Tancred personally chose Roger of Salerno.
What do you mean he personally chose? He's dead. Guess that's just how it fell.
These moments of instability were exactly what the regional rivals were waiting for. So, in 1112, the Atabeg of Mosul, Modud ibn al-Tuntash, launched a campaign that started with the siege of Turbessel, the core of Joscelin's domain. In June, a small Crusader force he led pushed the Seljuks back. Shortly afterwards, an attempt by an Armenian peasant army to capture Edessa was discovered, and Baldwin of Bourges, ruler of Edessa, galloped towards the city walls and slaughtered them. Down south, Baldwin of Jerusalem's advances were halted at Tyre, which he failed to capture, partly due to the departure of his Norwegian allies.
Yeah, it's crazy still that he was there.
In April 1112, a large combined force from the newly allied Fatimids and the Atabeg of Damascus, Togteki, forced him to lift the siege and ride back to his capital. Modud proposed to unite all Islamic forces against the Christians and repulse them once and for all, resulting in the most promising anti-Crusader coalition since 1098. In 1113, the armies of Mosul and Damascus stood as one and crossed the river Jordan south of the Sea of Galilee. In response, Baldwin and his bannermen offered battle near the bridge of Al-Sanabra. The numbers on both sides are unknown, but a decisive blow here could have meant a disaster for either side. Modud used the classic feigned retreat, and drew many of the Crusaders out of their defensive positions.
So Baldwin's like the last, I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure, Baldwin's like the last original prince, Crusader in this region, right? I'm pretty sure.
Including Baldwin, who charged in. Almost immediately, he realized his mistake as he encountered the full force of the coalition army, and his soldiers were attacked from every side.
Dang.
Yet again, a string of luck and good armor saved the king, but the same could not be said for a big portion of his army. The survivors formed up and held their ground against the arrow fire, while the Muslim coalition began sending columns to raid the countryside.
That's actually pretty smart. As they're occupied, go deal with something.
One of them sacked the town of Nablus, all while the Crusaders could only hold their ground on a nearby hill. Contingents from Tripoli and Antioch soon reinforced Baldwin, but he still lacked the means to repulse the raiders. Despite that, Mordud and Toktekin failed to take any major stronghold, and soon turned back once supplies ran out. The victorious leaders feasted in Damascus, where before long, the Hashashins struck their next blow. Mordud was slain after his prayers by the secret order.
Bro! We gotta learn about the assassins. I'm just such an Assassin's Creed nerd that I just gotta learn about the assassins, bro. Because at first I didn't even know that was real. And then like, I only learned that was real like maybe not even like 5 months ago. So this is insane. We gotta back it up. I gotta see that again.
Struck their next blow. Mordud was slain after his prayers by the secret order, which would later end up killing the next two rulers of Mosul in 1126 and 1131.
Wow.
Later that year, Emir of Aleppo, Ridwan, died of old age, and the streets of Aleppo were flooded with violent militia, who captured every supporter of the Order of Assassins and executed them for conspiring with the Crusaders.
One thing I will note, every single medieval faction kingdom has horrible succession like structure. Meaning like after someone dies, they're so focused on what's happening right now that they don't plan ahead, or their administration doesn't plan ahead for what happens after. They just have poor planning. There might be some countries that do it really well, but most of them do not.
The successor, Alp-Arslan, was 16 then, but suffered from a severe speech impediment, which gave him the nickname Al-Akras, or the Mute. Upon his ascension, many of his brothers were killed, and only a year later, a usurper called El-Baba killed the boy in hopes of obtaining power for himself with the support of Damascus. Taking advantage of the fact that his enemies were distracted
and now we see Aleppo, sorry for pausing again, but now we see Aleppo as kind of like its own city-state versus how it was kind of engulfed within the Seljuk Empire. Now Aleppo was more like just the city in the previous, at least maps that I've seen, but now it's actually grown to to this. And I'm wondering who's running the Sultanate of Rum at this point.
And killing each other. Ruler of Edessa, Baldwin of Bourg, hatched a plot of his own by inviting Jocelyn of Courtenay under the pretense that he was writing his will. Upon arrival, Jocelyn was imprisoned and forced to relinquish all his fiefs except Galilee. Soon after, the two sides mended their relations with the classic marriage alliance pact as they married each other's sisters.
That's weird, bro.
The latter phase of the First Crusade is a constant
I guess it's not weird for the time though.
Rotation between years where all sides are taking a pause and preparing for the upcoming conflicts, and ones filled with impactful events. 1113 is easily one of the busiest of those years.
1113 is also the year when the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John's in Malta was founded to protect pilgrims to the Holy Land, formally recognized. Dang, my nose is itchy. Formally recognized by the Papal Bull, formal proclamation issued by Pope Pascal II, called the Postulatio Voluntate.
Back in Byzantium, Alexios was struggling with the fact that almost all the Crusader leaders he had personally met and received oaths from were now dead. This new generation of leaders didn't experience his hospitality firsthand, and was quick to forget the many shipments that prevented their annihilation, as well as the guides that got them through Anatolia. They knew him as the treacherous emperor who abandoned them at Antioch.
That's not fair at all.
And attacked the hero Bohemond. Alexios exhausted every diplomatic measure, yet he was nowhere closer to securing the Holy Land, especially Antioch. Unfortunately for him, his dream had to be postponed, as the death of Kilij Arslan led to a new wave of Seljuk incursions. His son, Malik Shah, didn't ratify the truce between the two sides, and in both 1110 and 1112, major raids were conducted around Smyrna. In 1113, a massive army marched up to the gates of Nicaea and began pillaging and looting the countryside. The city's governor sallied out with his forces and confronted the Seljuks, only to be captured in the fighting. It was then that Alexios did the unthinkable and crossed over, personally leading his army as he tried to catch up to the enemy.
Dang!
The emperor rescued vast amounts of loot and prisoners after a quick skirmish, and the governor of Nicaea was saved. Unfortunately, all hope of securing the Holy Land was abandoned, as a new war with the Sultanate of Rum was at hand.
I mean, to be honest, yeah, you gotta take care of your home versus you take care of something very far away.
In 1114, all sides were licking their wounds, and there was little to no activity, especially since a massive earthquake destroyed most of Antioch's formidable defences, forcing its regent to devote most of his time to restoring them. The other notable event was the continued assault on Edessa by the new Atabeg of Mosul, Basuki, who invaded in May before being repelled. The following year, however, would be filled with action on nearly every front. In 1115, the Seljuk Sultan Muhammad Tapa, who had been calling for action against the Crusaders, appointed Bursuk II, the Lord of Hamadan, as the leader of a large force made up of soldiers from Upper Mesopotamia, numbering between 8,000 to 10,000. News of this force shocked not only the Crusader princes, but other regional powers too. The new Atabeg of Aleppo, al-Baba, sent envoys to both Toghtekin of Damascus and El-Ghazi of Mardin and asked them for aid against the Sultan, while they, in their own right, approached Roger of Salerno. Messengers galloped all over the Holy Land, and pretty soon everyone in the Levant was in a temporary alliance against the Seljuk Sultan. This
Dang. That's a lot of territory. I mean, I guess more or less like a defensive pact. Because I don't see them going on the offensive at all. Well, I say the people in the Levant, I don't see going on the offensive.
Included Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. In short, the only way to unite all of these squabbling states was for an outside force like the Byzantines or Seljuks to invade them. The Allies gathered their armies and moved 80 kilometers south to the walled town of Apamea, strategically located at the crossroads between Aleppo, Damascus, and Antioch, allowing them to maneuver and rescue whichever city Bursuk headed to. The next time scouts reported movement of the Seljuk army was when it captured Hama, a town 30 kilometers from their location, before camping at Shaizar. Baldwin of Jerusalem immediately mobilized 500 knights and 1,000 foot soldiers and marched north. Along the way, the now adult Count Pawn of Tripoli joined the fray with 200 knights and 2,000 infantry. The king sent a message forbidding Roger from engaging the enemy before reinforcements arrived. Bursuk's forces soon closed around Roger's armed camp, attempting to lure the Antiochenes and their allies into a charge. Their skirmishing tactics severely provoked the Latins. Things were so tense that Roger threatened to put out the eyes of any man who sallied out of the camp without permission.
Well, I don't even know if that would even be possible because, you know, they would have so much, like, I don't think he could even control if someone was to defect or to abandon at this point, because maybe he could. I don't know. It's a good deterrence, but I don't know if he would be able to do that.
Later, he rode through the camp with his sword drawn to emphasize his point. When Bursuk heard of Baldwin's relieving force, which included 5,000 Muslim allies, he withdrew to the east. Baldwin's combined army may have been as large as 10,700 men. The coalition quickly followed and burned much of Shaizar as punishment for allying with the Seljuks. When Bursuk didn't turn back to defend the town, the allied leaders assumed the campaign was over and left for home. As soon as the allied host dispersed, Bursuk invaded again and captured the Christian-held town of Kafatab near Apamea. A weary and abandoned Roger recalled his Antiochene army and took to the field again with just 700 cavalry and 2,000 infantry. supported only by Baldwin of Bork's contingent from Edessa. Meanwhile, Basuk took his army towards Zardana, not far from Antioch. Roger stationed his army south of the city at the castle of Rugia, near a bridge on the Orontes River. Early on September 14th, Roger received intelligence that his opponents were carelessly going into camp near Samin to water their horses. He rapidly advanced and took Basuk's army by complete surprise. As the Crusaders launched their attack, some Turkic soldiers were still entering the camp.
So this is about to be a rout.
Roger divided the Frankish army into left, centre and right divisions. Baldwin led the left wing, while Prince Roger personally commanded the centre. The Crusaders attacked in an echelon formation, with the left wing leading. As we often see in these charge or feign retreat battles, once one side surprised the other, victory was imminent. The Seljuks were pressed back to a hillside behind their camp, which quickly became overrun by the Crusaders.
Is he gonna get captured?
The Frankish right was the only place where the Latins struggled, as a Seljuk counterattack broke the Turcopoles stationed there. The fighting continued for some time, but ultimately Roger was victorious and proved himself a worthy successor to Tancred. At least 3,000 Seljuks were killed and many captured, along with property worth 300,000 bezants.
I don't know what that equates to, but it sounds like a lot.
Contrast, the Frankish losses were minor. This victory solidified the Crusader domains in the north, and neutralized the danger of Mosul for a whole decade. With the Seljuk threat eliminated, the Muslim Atabegs quickly broke their alliance with the Crusaders, and some personally travelled to Baghdad to obtain a pardon from Muhammad Tapa. Baldwin of Bourges made good use of this victory by moving against some small Armenian principalities in the valley of the Euphrates, taking Berejik and a few other towns whose population he resettled elsewhere. As for Baldwin of Jerusalem, he decided to make a move against the Fatimids, who were attempting to capture Jaffa. The Latins rescued the city and pushed further into Jordan, even establishing some crucial outposts, such as Montreal. The following year, he returned to the region and marched as far as Aqaba on the Red Sea. After
that territory has expanded immensely. He doesn't have Gaza, he doesn't.
The local inhabitants fled, Baldwin constructed castles in the town and on a nearby island, leaving a garrison in both fortresses. The three strongholds, Montreal, Eilat and Pharaoh's Island, secured the control of the rich caravan routes between Syria and Egypt.
And now he has a warm water port, or just a port, in the Red Sea now.
They also enabled Baldwin to survey the movements of the Egyptian troops continuously. From the Red Sea coast, Baldwin hastened to Tyre and began the construction of a new fortress at the ladder of Tyre known as Scandalian Castle, which completed the blockade of the town from the mainland. Tyre was a major stronghold that continued to resist the Crusaders and was a vital front they had to close. But late in 1116, Baldwin fell seriously ill. On his deathbed, he ordered all of his debts to be paid off and began distributing his wealth and considered his successor. But this was not the end of Baldwin. The man who travelled all this way still had one good fight left in him.
No way.
As did the other main protagonist of this story.
Alexios?
In 1116, Alexios Komnenos got tired of waiting for someone else to finish the job and rode out in force. The Byzantine emperor, who had saved Eastern Rome from annihilation, mustered an army aimed at reconquering Anatolia by striking at the very heart of the Sultanate of Rum. But as his troops were still being drilled near Nicomedia, several nomadic groups began raiding western Anatolia. This didn't dissuade the emperor, so he marched along the known route.
If it's really what they look like, that is intimidating, bro. You can just see the wealth poured off this guy. It looks like he's got Crayola armor.
From Nicaea to Antioch in Pisidia, as he headed towards Iconium. Smaller fortresses and outposts were captured, and many captives were rescued. Then the army entered the plateau. Malik Shah had gathered his own army and awaited the Romans in an ambush. However, in a rare sight of character growth, the 59-year-old Alexios, once the stubbornly impulsive young man who rushed headfirst into danger, felt disaster looming and decided to turn back. As he withdrew, he gathered numerous local Romans and escorted them back east. Aware that danger could loom around every turn, the emperor commanded that his soldiers make a hollow square formation. The soldiers made firm rectangles with civilians at the center, slowly moving through the dangerous landscape. Indeed, the now returning raiders from the west stumbled upon the large host and began attacking them with their usual hit-and-run tactics. At the rear, Malik Shah also pounced with his men. Day and night, the discipline and morale of the Byzantine soldiers were tested, but they did not falter under the Komneni standard.
Dang, this is impressive, actually.
After realizing he could not break the formation, Malik Shah sent envoys and called for a truce. Sultan and Emperor met in person and shook hands as they ratified the treaty made under Malik Shah's father. The Sultanate of Rum kept control of central and eastern Anatolia, while the wealthy Byzantine western Anatolia would be free from raids. This was the best that Alexios could hope for, and while not all of Anatolia was in his hands,
despite the fact that Trebizond had been mostly autonomous for at least several decades,
every major city in the region was under his rule. But yet again, fate had different plans. As Malik Shah returned to his camp, his officers captured and blinded him as punishment for complacency.
Dang.
The source of their wealth was raiding, and this treaty could harm their way of life and their power. Alexios had saved the lives of thousands of his citizens, but yet again, he worked so hard to obtain so little. Only 2 years later, after 37 years on the throne, Alexios Komnenos finally succumbed to his illnesses.
What an emperor, guys.
Few rulers have a resume as rich as his. His deeds are still being discussed today, with some historians laying the fault for the impending Crusades and rivalry with merchant states flatly on his feet. To them, he is the man who opened Pandora's box while trying to save his empire.
He didn't open Pandora's box. I think he allowed the empire to go another 300 years. It could have easily fell apart at the top of the 11th century. Easily.
Others see him as the greatest Byzantine emperor, surpassing the likes of Justinian and Basil II.
I don't know about Justinian.
For his reforms of the
Basil.
Clergy and monetary system, as well as the successful defense against the Normans, Pechenegs and Seljuks, and the reconquest of western Anatolia, despite a dozen assassination attempts and starting with nothing.
Probably more.
But both sides agree that few rulers have ever been as devoted to their state and people as Alexios. But our story, which took 2 years to make and correctly adjust the end date of the First Crusade, concludes with a different bittersweet ending.
Really?
That of the last of the original princes who answered Urban's call. Baldwin of Jerusalem miraculously recovered in early 1117 and continued doing his best. He aimed to secure the southern frontier with a fresh new expedition against the Fatimids, which began in March 1118, and went as far as Farama on the Nile Delta without a fight, as Muslim civilians fled before the Crusader army. Baldwin's retainers were hopeful and urged him to attack Cairo itself, but suddenly an old wound to his kidneys, received in 1103, reopened. The King of Jerusalem succumbed in a matter of days spent securing the succession, for which he named his brother Eustace III, but also allowed the barons to elect Baldwin of Bork if necessary. 5 days later, his body was buried in the cavalry chapel of the Holy Sepulchre, next to that of his other brother Godfrey, on Palm Sunday.
Wow.
1118 saw the death of the Byzantine Emperor, King of Jerusalem, Abbasid Caliph, Seljuk Sultan, and the Bishop of Rome, acting as a hard reset that shuffled many political alliances and interests. The stories of the Seljuks, Romans, Latins, and Fatimids were far from their finale, but the story of the First Crusade and the main characters who caused this geopolitical shift had reached its conclusion.
That's where we're going to stop today, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was an insane series. I don't know where we're going to go from here. Do we go to the Second Crusade? Well, there was a Second Crusade, apparently, from this video. Where do we go from here? I'd love to hear you guys' video suggestions down below. I don't have much more to say. as we talked pretty much after every episode, and this one was more or less a conclusive episode. It seems that, like I said before, Alexios is one of the top emperors of the Byzantines ever. Is Baldwin and Godfrey still undisturbed in the Holy Sepulchre, if that's how you say it? I'm very curious. I'm going to check that out next. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.